there is power in names. They can help us gain a better understanding of something or someone. But they can also carry a history, and in some cases, those histories don't age well. Many birds are named after enslavers, colonizers, and even white supremacists. Today on the show, we're going to speak to someone who is working to change that. We'll also speak to a fluent Cree speaker who has dedicated his life to teaching others about Indigenous culture and language. And our focus today is on birds, because yes, birds are named after some of those dark histories. As always, we want to hear from you. What birds do you think are appropriately named? And what can we learn about an animal or place from its name? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Gabriel Foley is a birder and ornithologist with the group Bird Names for Birds. He spent about a decade in Regina and attended the University of Regina. He now lives in Maryland, and that's where we've reached him. Gabriel, hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. I know I should not be shocked or surprised by this because so many things were given names after colonizers and whatnot. But it is a bit of a shocking thing to think about. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit of that context, the history of bird naming in the U.S. and Canada. Who got to name many of the birds that we know today?
Yeah, you don't really think about it too much because the name of a bird is just the name that it's always had. But naming of organisms is pretty much first come, first served in how Western science approaches it. And so that's during the period when most birds were being named in North America, which was like the 1700s ish is into the early 1800s is when most of the birds were being named. It was pretty much explorers who would go out and they would collect birds, they would describe them, and sometimes they'd send them back to someone else who would write up a publication, and then that publication would be where the name would come from. Sometimes they would do it themselves. But, it's pretty much first come, first served. Whoever discovered the bird first gets to name it.
Mm-hmm. Which is such a practice in colonization, because, of course, birds and their names have always been they've always been here, and they were part of Indigenous cultures. And so it was almost like a renaming of species, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when did you start to think more deeply about this? When did you start to question bird names?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, you don't really think about the names that much because it's just what that is called. I'm Gabriel. You don't really think too much about where the name Gabriel came from. But in 2018, a fellow by the name of Robert Driver presented a proposal to the group that oversees bird names in North America. And he said, this bird, McCown's longspur, which in Saskatchewan is found down in the southwest corner in the shortgrass prairie, he said this bird was named after an officer in the Confederate Army. And I don't think that that is the kind of person that we want to be honoring with a name of one of our birds. I think that we should change this name.
And where?
Sorry.
Yeah. So what happened with that? What is the process to rename a bird?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a group called the American Ornithological Society, and they have a committee that is in charge of bird taxonomy in North America. And so they provide the official list, and this is mostly based on scientific taxonomy, right? These are largely taxonomists who are concerned with where species limits lie for each of these different birds. But anybody can submit a proposal to this committee, and they can say, I think that based on this research, this taxonomy should change. Or it's not as common, but they can also say, hey, I think that the common name of this bird should be changed to something else. And then the committee, which has 10 or 12 people on it, makes a decision, provides comments about why they made that decision, and then that's what we get.
So what is the long spur called now? Was that a successful name change?
So it was initially rejected, actually. The first proposal was rejected. And then the committee themselves they redid the proposal. And they submitted that proposal to themselves, and they accepted that proposal. So the name did end up getting changed a couple years later. And it's now called the thick-billed longspur.
And is that a more fitting name? I mean, of course, anything is better than what it was before, I guess, but thick-billed longspur. So more descriptive.
It's certainly more descriptive, yes.
It's quite something to think that there is this movement, and in many ways it started with this is a Saskatchewan story, that bird is found in southwest Saskatchewan.
Yeah. And it's not a bird that gets a ton of attention normally. It doesn't have a big population. It's pretty range restricted. And the habitat that it really likes is this short native prairie, which native prairie is, it's basically, an endangered habitat. There's not a lot of it left.
And what exactly does it look like?
It's beautiful. I honestly, I really like them. It's kind of a grayish bird, fairly small, like think a sparrow. And it has a little bit of a black throat, and then this red, kind of more of like a brownish red bar across its wing. And one of the proposed names, which I actually preferred, but it was bay-winged longspur. This was one that was used way back to describe the bird.
So with the change in name for this bird, then what happened? Because this really is a movement across the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah. So after that proposal, it generated lots of conversations between lots of different folks, especially within the birding community. We're fairly accustomed to bird names changing semi-regularly, 2 or 3 a year, something like that. And they're always a source of discussion. But the reasons for changing this were pretty different from most other changes. So you can imagine that the conversations that followed were also pretty different. And my partner and I, we chatted quite a bit about this. And, we kind of came to the conclusion that, why are we naming birds after people? Just full stop, regardless of who it's named after. And so we ended up writing a letter to the American Ornithological Society and just saying basically that we think that all eponymous names, all birds that are named after people, should be changed to having descriptive names. Names that are more fitting for the birds.
And again, looking back at some of the history, was it quite commonplace for there to be that the dark side of history, that like what the example of McCowan? Mm-hmm. Are there others like that? Other people that you may be calling a bird something and not realizing what the name was? Just how prevalent was that?
Yeah, I mean, it ranges, right? Just like anything. You've got McCowan, who was an officer in the Confederate Army. You have somebody like John Kirk Townsend. Townsend's warbler is named after him. He would rob graves of Indigenous people and then send the skulls back to Samuel Morton, who's infamous as being heavily involved with the founding of eugenics, which has huge implications today, right? And then you've got other people that we really don't know that much about. A lot of, you kind of think, wow, if somebody got a bird named after them, they must have been really important, or they must have really contributed a lot to ornithology, right? But a lot of the times it was actually the folks who were footing the bill for this exploring that these guys were undertaking. And so, if you wanted to say thank you to your funder, you might name a bird after it. Today, if we had this practice more often, we might have things like Walmart Sparrow or Pepsi Oriole or something, right?
Yikes.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, you've had an impact on local author Trevor Harriott, who we know well on Blue Sky. He's often part of Birdline. He's the author of several books, including The Economy of Sparrows. Let's take a listen to his thoughts on this.
I think I first heard about bird names for birds sometime in, I think it was 2020, because I'd been writing the novel for probably about 4 years by then and working on drafts, and because the main character is obsessed with the old 19th century bird collectors. I was thinking about all these men, mostly the ones in Canada though, but some of the ones in the United States, and the kind of lives they led and so on. And then I came across this article, an opinion piece in the Washington Post, I think in August, by Jordan Rutter and Gabe Foley. And I wait a minute, Gabe Foley, I know that name. Gabe used to live in Regina, and now he's in the States. Anyway, and it was about raising awareness in the U.S. about these, what we call eponyms, things named after people. So then I discovered they had done all this work in social media and in the broadcast and print as well about all the men that have had birds named after them, people like Bachman and Bendire, Townsend, McCown, Audubon, and others. And some of these men I'd been reading about as well in doing the research for the novel. And they revealed all the things that these men had been doing, the slaves they owned, and how some of them were deeply involved in the military's colonial enterprise. In the Civil War, some of them were fighting for the Confederate side, or they were killing indigenous people in some of what they were called the Indian Wars. And then there were people like Audubon and I think Townsend who were raiding graves, and collecting skulls to support racist pseudoscience on white supremacy. All this stuff was just so disturbing. And you see that, as Jordan and Gabriel and their supporters sometimes say, an eponym is a verbal statue for a person. You name a street or a school or a species after a person, you're honoring them. Anyway, so I decided to do a little bit of research on my own and maybe add something into the novel on this phenomenon and what was happening with what we're discovering about bird names. And so I wanted to find something a little closer to where the novel is set in the Northern Great Plains. And so just inside Montana, there is a story that involves Major Charles Bendire, whose biography describes him as an egg collector and Indian fighter. He had been given his title of major for what they were quoting as gallant service in action against Indians at Canyon Creek, Montana in 1877. This is information from the National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. Anyway, so he was just after Little Bighorn and Sitting Bull's escape into Canada. And the Nez Perce were chased off of their land in what became Oregon in the Wallowa Valley. The federal government broke their promise, started pushing the Nez Perce off the land, and Chief Joseph, their leader, led them on a journey trying to escape the army for several months in 1877. And eventually it came to an end, and Bendire was involved in the battle in Montana as the Nez Perce were trying to get to the medicine line. But anyway, Bendire was, the whole time he was working for the cavalry, whether it was in Arizona or in places like Montana, he was collecting bird eggs and bird specimens because he was an ornithologist. And this crazy mixture of being involved in colonial enterprises and being a bird watcher, and then having bird names named after you. It's just wrong.
As Trevor Harriott. He's the author of several books, including The Economy of Sparrows. You are listening to Blue Sky, and one of our guests today is Gabriel Foley, a birder with the group Bird Names for Birds. He spent a lot of time in Regina, now lives in Maryland. Gabriel, listening to Trevor Harriott share that story, is that one that you're familiar with?
No, I hadn't heard that one specifically.
Now, doesn't that say something, right?
Yeah.
Of just how prevalent?
Yeah.
Trevor mentioned, too, that often we have this conversation and we're talking about renaming streets and statues, and birds are part of that. Did that resonate with you?
Yeah. The idea that these names are verbal statues is kind of the catalyst that really drove my partner and I, Jordan Rudder, that drove us to push for this change. We have, we have museums, we have literature. These are the places where history is recorded and where you learn about history. You have statues as a place not to learn about history, but to honor it. And we should not do anything uh, to erase our history, right? That should be something that we learn from. But we do get to make choices about which part of our history we choose to honor, and statues are part of that. And so the idea that when you name a bird after someone, you're honoring them. It's called an honorific, right? That's a verbal statue, and we can make a choice about whether we choose to honor somebody through that name or not.
That concern about erasing history, that does come up when we have conversations like this. Have you received pushback to this?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, it's a fairly controversial issue, especially within the birding community. Anytime there's a name change, there's lots of conversation. We're talking about a fairly broad change, so there's going to be even more conversation. I think, overall, that's great. First, it shows that people care about this, right? But it also provides a great opportunity to explore not just the issue of bird names, which is a fairly small, isolated thing, but the issue of why are we talking about bird names in the first place, which is this small kind of isolated thing, right? And I think it really just shows how everything that we interact with to some degree or another, even something like bird names, has these elements of our colonial past, and the privilege that has trickled down with that.
Hmm. Yeah. It also makes me think of the story of the white woman in Central Park who called the police on a man who was Black, who was birding, claiming he was threatening her. Was that story part of the movement for change and opening the door to conversations about what we're calling birds, but also who is birding and who's taking up that space, and is it inclusive?
Absolutely. That was a big part for us. There were a lot of these conversations happening in early 2020. And if you look at the demographics of birding, right, it's fairly homogenous. We're a pretty white group on the whole. And if we want to change that, right, there's no one magic bullet, there's no one solution, but we want to be as inclusive and as welcoming as possible. And I think 99% of the birding and ornithology community agrees with that. We want whoever is interested in birds to feel safe and welcome in our community. One of the ways that we can do that is by making a statement, right? A statement that carries a little bit of weight with it. Something like changing bird names from something that, honors folks that were quite involved with the history that has, created a lot of the racism that we deal with today. We can make that decision to change those names and just say, we're okay with the discomfort of learning new names. We want you to be part of the community if you want to be here.
Such an important and interesting conversation, and we have more time to get into that of how inclusive birding is. We've got a story that we'll share with people just a little bit later that comes to us from our colleagues at Unreserved about an Indigenous birding group, and we have a guest who will be joining us in just a bit, Kevin Lewis, who's a Cree speaker, and we'll talk to him about the traditions and Cree naming and how language can help us better understand plants, animals, our environment. So that's coming up in just a bit. Our guest right now is Gabriel Foley. He's a birder and ornithologist with the group Bird Names for Birds. We do hope that you'll join the conversation. Your thoughts on this, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. We got an email from Tamala with her own take on bird names. She says, thanks for the lovely topic. A while back, riding my bike to work, I was greeting the birds as I traveled. Hi, sparrow, hi, black-capped chickadee, etc. I saw robin and said, hi, robin. Then I thought, wait, that's my name for you. I asked the robin, what do you like to be called? Immediately, loudly, and unreservedly, the bird told me, beautiful, fierce, able, and content. I smiled. I was glad the bird told me its real name. I thought it was a much better name. Tamala, thanks for emailing. Like I said, you can email us too, bluesky@cbc.ca, or give us a call, 1-800-716-2221. Right now, let's check in with Laura Sharpaletti, who joins us with today's news headlines. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Alicia. Well, the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation remains locked in a contract dispute with the provincial government. And today, the STF is raising concerns about a sticking point we haven't heard much about during this labor dispute. And I'll have more on that at the top of the hour. Also, now that the evidence phase of the Greg Furtuck trial is concluded, the justice says the next step is to present final submissions. Those closing arguments will happen on Monday, February 26th, and I'll have those stories and much more coming up on your 1 o'clock news just after Blue Sky.
Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
You are listening to us on CBC Radio 1. That's 540 on the AM dial right across Saskatchewan, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina. Kevin Lewis is a Cree speaker. He also runs the Ganyasik Culture Camp at Minnesticwan Lake here in Saskatchewan. He's about to head off with his sled dogs today, but first he's taken some time to speak with us. Kevin, hello.
Oh, how are you, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm well. Welcome back to Blue Sky.
Yes, well, I'm glad to be back. I'm glad you phoned me back.
We've got a little bit of feedback, but I think we're going to be okay talking to you. I'm always jealous of where you are and where you get to spend your time. You've been out all morning?
On the lake for a little bit, and then come noontime, I ran over just to, do this interview.
Yeah. Well, you've been enjoying the view of the lake. You've also been listening to the show so far and the conversation we've been having. I'm wondering what has stood out to you so far.
Well, it's so educating, right? And it's educating for everybody. And then also the names of the birds, and then also like the word discovery is sort of like it's interesting to us, right? It's kind of like where we are with the conversation in terms of reconciliation, learning about the stories here. Using the languages, the local indigenous languages as well. So it's a really good space that we've inherited here to develop good storytelling on either side.
Yeah, it's troublesome to learn some of what we've talked about today, and it is the problematic history of discovering things, the environment around us. So, from your perspective, do you have names of birds that you recall, or just curious about your own knowledge of some of the Cree names for the birds around us?
All right, yeah, I do. And then here, this one was the one that I grew up with, and Googum is grandmother in Cree. And then Googum, what she used to say was when we all ended up at her place at one time or another, all of my cousins would be there. And then she would say, don't go playing too far into the bush because we're in a boreal forest. And then she would say, uhu, which means uhu is the owl will take you away. So and then because they're nocturnal, we didn't know this at the time, right? They hunt, and as soon as it's starting to get dark out, all of a sudden somebody would hear the hoot, right? Ooh, 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 ooh. somewhere in the background, and then one of the kids will yell, "Ooh, hoo!" Right, and then that's Cree for owl. So we'd run back in, and then not wanting this owl to take us away, right? So that's the first one that came to mind.
That's such a great story because the sound identifies the bird. Like, you know exactly what you're talking about, right? Like when we were talking with Gabriel, McCowan's longspur, like most people don't know this. And then when you find out the story about McCowan, you don't want to, you're like, okay. But a much more descriptive name is the thick-billed longspur. So hoo and having that language that describes something really specific, is that part of Cree naming, is to give a really specific description of to help people better understand what it is you're talking about?
It is. It really is. And then, I was looking at this. So right now we're in what we call Mixupis, which is the eagle moon. And then this full moon cycle here that we're in, this is where you're going to actually start seeing like the bald-headed eagle, the golden-headed eagle in our area, and then more and more, which means we made it through a winter. And then the next moon that's going to be coming following that is going to be that goose moon, Skipism. So when we hear those goose, the geese that fly from south, when they're coming this way, that spring is just around the corner, and then pretty soon the frogs will hear the call of the geese, and then they'll start singing their song. And then we call that frog moon. And then when the frog moon, when they start announcing spring is here, and then everything kind of follows, and we're in springtime and summertime.
That is actually something that a woman named Jennifer noticed. She sent us a note talking about the way Cree language named the 13 moons of the year. She says that's so cool and so ecologically aware, and she says bird-centric. So I'll read you more of her notes. So she writes, "Salmonberry bird is so much better than Swainson's thrush. If we give animals names that provide insights into their behaviors and habitat preference, just think of how much that will grow our knowledge of them writ large, and that could totally engender a more holistic and ecological culture. Language is so potent. What about naming plants after animals like bearberry or bison brush?" And then she goes on to say, "The way the Cree language named the 13 moons of the year is so cool and ecologically aware and bird-centric." So Kevin, Jennifer thinks naming birds about their behaviors and preferences will help us understand them better. That sounds to be in line with what your thinking is.
Yeah, it is. Like it's in those moons, right? And then, of course, like following that, we know when they're going to be laying their eggs, and then we also have like a hatching moon that we call, and that's going to be like June, July. So we sort of allow them to raise their young ones as well. So and then moving on, we even have a flying up moon where they're starting to go south, for the winter, and then when they start doing that, it kicks us in the gear where we're like, okay, come on, like we got things to do because that winter's coming. We got to put things away. We got to get ready for this winter, and let's try to make this winter as amazing as possible, I guess.
Wow. So that act of paying attention to birds that's not new to you. That's in you, right? Like what role? Tell me more about that. The role that birds play in your culture.
Well, wintertime, like let's just face it, in Canada we have most of the half of the year, right, is winter. And then we have hockey, we have snowshoeing, and we have dog sledding up here and stuff like that, ice fishing and whatnot. But then they're tough, right? They're strong. Like it's minus 30 sometimes, minus 40 with the wind chill. So you make it through the winter. But then our teachings is when you start hearing some of those birds, some of those spring birds, they call them, some summer birds, when they start arriving, and the very last one to arrive, when it's like, yeah, we made it through another winter and it's summer, it's that we call pipitu, and that's the robin. And then when the robin starts singing their beautiful songs, then we know, we've made it through winter.
Beautiful. So if we are renaming birds, Kevin, how useful do you think it would be to draw on the indigenous languages of the people where these birds are native to?
Well, we do it in a way already. Like, let's say Saskatchewan, right? That's Saskatchewan or Saskatchewan, which means the fast-flowing river. And then Saskatoon, that's Saskatoon, which is the Saskatoon berry. And then we do it with another province right beside us, Manitoba, Mantuapuna, right? So they're translated already, and I think it would make sense. Like, I was looking at, and there's beautiful websites that you can go on, and then you log in, and then you just listen to these birds, and I was starting to, get that sense of just listening to them online, and then getting that sense of, like, these are summer birds. It's going to be sounding like this soon, right? So it's exciting because berries are going to be following them. There's going to be green, like, things that we can harvest, things that we can. We're outside with no skidoo pants or winter gear, right? So that's always nice.
The sounds and signs of the season. Kevin, I want to bring in one of our callers here. So right now I am speaking with Kevin Lewis, who's a Cree speaker from Ministiquan Lake here in Saskatchewan. And we have Rob on the line here in Saskatoon. Hi, Rob.
Yeah, hi, Alicia. Yeah, so this is also interesting and very enlightening. And I was so interested in what Trevor Harriet just had to say a little while ago. And it makes me flash back to a canoe trip that I had with a friend up in one of the northern Saskatchewan, and we stopped at this island. And I know this is not a bird, it's an island, but there was a stone monument on that island engraved. This was an island called Selkirk Island. And Selkirk was apparently a soldier or general in World War I, or I can't remember the exact details. But we both mused, my canoe partner and I, as to whether that soldier had ever seen that island, and also what the original Aboriginal peoples had named that island and who had lived there for thousands of years. And we wondered how the natives of that area felt about us coming in, putting up a stone monument on that island and calling it Selkirk Island. Yeah. And I wonder how many more islands like this we've done this to.
Isn't that true, right? Paying attention to what's around us, whose name, what's it called, who is it named after? Rob, thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to ask Kevin a bit about this. Thanks for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That's Rob in Saskatoon. So, Kevin, hearing a story like that, I'm guessing it's probably not the first kind of story that you've heard like that.
Yeah. We have forests. We have, like, all those rivers. They're all named, and then they're all named. Like, let's say here at this lake we have Spigamak, we have Kaniag, and then where we are, which we named on behalf of, like, what the original name is, Kaniasik. So we have these traditional names, and they're very descriptive. So it's like, I'm sure, that was probably a name, and there's sacred locations as well, like sacred spaces. And most islands, they're very safe to camp at, but they're also, some of them will have, like, beautiful stories. And we have, like, just like they do in Iceland, just like they do with the Irish, we have little people stories here as well. And up in that beautiful area where the last caller was probably paddling, I paddled some of those rivers too, and you can just see and imagine, the names, and you want to engage with the locals, and there's a lot of rich histories with those islands, lakes, and of course these birds have a lot to do with that too.
Yeah, because that is what you do. You take people out to your culture camps. You get people into nature, surrounded by beautiful forests and islands and lakes, but also Cree language. So what is the benefit of people learning about birds in their natural environment with someone like you?
Well, it's, let's say in the summertime, like, because we're avid paddlers, like, we love paddling. We paddle the rivers, we paddle the lakes and whatnot. And then when you're sharing the water with some of these loons, and then you hear a loon go off, and then all of a sudden it triggers another loon, and then all of a sudden they're talking back and forth, and then you teach somebody, okay, this is how you can make a loon call out of your hands, right? And then all of a sudden there's a teaching moment there as well, and then we don't harvest any loons. We share the lake with the loons, so they're fishing just as we're fishing, right? And they love fish just as we do, so there's conservation that's tied in there as well. So if we keep the lakes and waters clean, we're going to see more loons, and then we're going to continue our own sustenance, right, off of the lake as well. So it's like layer after layer. There's so many teachings to that.
Kevin, what would you say is the key to getting more people, especially young people, Indigenous kids, interested in birding?
Well, I think it's just getting them out there, and then especially we're birders. Like in our culture, we are birders because like we've named like probably half of those moons after the birds coming, and the winged ones, we call them. So we pray to them and we give thanks to them because when they come, they bring the summer. They bring we call this one really big bird the thunderbird, and this thunder being comes and will start bringing rain. And then that'll start nourishing sort of like the greens. All of a sudden the leaves follow. All of a sudden things are budding and whatnot, right? So I think it's just exposing them to that and taking them out. And then with the use of technology now, like I did today earlier, like I was like, I can't remember what the sound of ahasu, which is the crow, versus gagagu, which is a raven. And then so I listened. I'm like, ka, 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 that's gagagu. And then ahasu exactly sounds like the Cree name for it. And, just things like that I think would engage them.
Kevin, it's been so great talking to you today. I'll let you get back out into nature. Thanks for being one of our guests today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Bye.
Bye. That is Kevin Lewis, who's a fluent Cree speaker. He runs culture camps here in Saskatchewan. In a moment, we're going to hear from our colleague from Unreserved, host Rosanna Deerchild. She was out with a group of people. I think all of them were Indigenous, and they were out birding. So we'll hear about their experiences in just a moment. But I just want to go back to our first guest on Blue Sky, who's been listening along. This is Gabriel Foley, who's a birder with the group Bird Names for Birds, because this is what sparked today's Blue Sky, was the work that he and many are doing to change the names of many of our birds. So Gabriel, I just want to give you an opportunity to comment on what you just heard from Kevin. Obviously, he's using such descriptive language to talk about the environment around him. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. It's terrific. Yeah, I mean, the Indigenous names, they convey a lot more information, especially with, the timing of things, I think, than our names do. I think there's one Indigenous name for bird that we use now, just, as its official English bird name. And that's the Sora. Soras are in Saskatchewan as well. Not very common, but they're a tiny little wetland bird, and they sound just like their name, Sora, Sora.
I love that. Okay, well, maybe they spotted some Soras, although this group's in Manitoba. I thought we could go along with host Rosanna Deerchild from Unreserved. She met up with these birders because we've been talking a lot about the power of birds, but also what actions are happening to make birding a more inclusive pastime. So let's listen to them out birding.
So we're at Kings Park right now. It's a park in Winnipeg, just south of the University of Manitoba campus, Fort Garry campus. And this is where we do a lot of our birding walks for the UM Indigenous Birding Club.
We invite students or U of M faculty and staff to join us. And usually our walks last about an hour and a half, just to be able to walk here, look at some birds, and then walk back. So,
what interested you in birding?
Well, my background's in zoology. So a long time ago, I went to school to study birds. But I've always had a passion for birds. I think it was probably the first summer job I had in university, working closely with birds at the Manitoba Wildlife Rehabilitation Organization. I think that's really what spurred my interest.
And Bailey, what about for you?
Well, for me, it it all happened during the pandemic, and I feel like a lot of us were feeling a lot of emotions during that time. But for me, I was quite depressed, and like I was trying to find ways that were different than what I knew to cope with what I was going through. And I just so happened to kind of look out the window, like I think a lot of us were at the time because we couldn't really go anywhere. And I started noticing these birds that I don't think I really paid much attention to. And I started to notice they were really consistent in being there for me. So I was able to really connect with them on a different level than I really expected. And at the time, I was also working with my elder, who started to bring in birds, and we were harvesting birds together. And so I kind of had that spiritual connection to them as well. So it kind of just started tumbling from there, and I just kind of grew this passion for them, and I really wanted to be able to share that joy with other people. So it was awesome that Justin and I get to partner on that and be able to share that with others. So.
And had you met Justin through the birding club, or
no? We actually we worked together as student advisors at the Indigenous Student Center. So we were talking about, we both have this passion. What can we do to kind of invite others to join in on this passion with us and share that joy with other people? So kind of just formed from there.
And Justin, were you apprehensive about, starting a birding club as an Indigenous person?
Actually, no, I think it just kind of all came together really nicely. I feel like it brought together all my worlds. I enjoy working in student affairs, but bringing in the birds, so my background in birds, but also my indigeneity, and bringing all that together into this club was really important to me. And the club is who I am. It's my most authentic self when I'm out here with the club. In terms of wellness, it's just getting out on the land, I found was so important. And birds provide just a little bit more than just going for a walk, right? So you really have to use all your senses. You're really in the moment when you're out here looking for birds. So first you're listening for them, and then you're watching for them, and it's really relaxing. It really grounds you. But I also find kind of just the way we go about it is a little bit different than probably another birding tour or whatever, right? We just don't see that there's a leader to the tour, like our walks. There's no expert. Everyone brings knowledge to our walks and shares that knowledge. And I feel like it's a real social way of learning, but also a very authentic way because we're out there actually looking at the birds. We don't want to center Western knowledge either. So people will have local knowledge that they can share. So knowledge they've gained from, say, their grandparents, right? That just know a lot about these birds. Also, we're not here to police the proper names for birds or anything like that. So if someone calls the bird locally that name, that is proper knowledge as well. So we're really cognizant of respecting all knowledges and bring them all together. Yeah. I also feel it's really inquiry-based learning. So we'll be out here, we'll see something, and we don't have the answer, but then we're asking the questions, right? And I find that's a really cool way to learn too. So in terms of my Métis ancestry, that's how we went about things. You go out and you do things, and that's how you learn about it, right? And we learn in a more social way than just someone telling us what the knowledge is. So that's what it means to me in terms of it's kind of how we go about it.
That's Justin Rasmussen and Bailey Hendry. They are with the University of Manitoba Indigenous Bird Club. They organize bird walks throughout the year and organize workshops that integrate Indigenous knowledge into this pastime. And that was part of their conversation with unreserved host Rosanna Deerchild. Our guest today is Gabriel Foley. Gabriel, that last bit there from Justin about respecting all knowledges, that is so interesting, and I guess the fine line and the delicate dance that you and other ornithologists are probably doing as we find a way forward when it comes to bird names.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. The American Ornithological Society, which I referenced earlier, they're kind of in charge of bird names in North America. They're the official standardized list. There's a lot of benefits to being standardized, right? If everybody uses the same word for the same thing, then we all know what we're talking about. And that's great. But there's also a lot of beauty to having differences and diversity, even with something like a name. And, you know, just because we have, you know, a bird that I might call this and you call it that, that doesn't make one name right or wrong.
Hmm.
It can really highlight the differences in how we perceive the world or how we've learned about it.
Maybe just more entries on the Merlin ID app, because that's what I use to identify some calls and birds. And I don't know, maybe that's part of it, is just that a bird can go by many names. I don't know.
Well, I mean, eBird is really great for this. eBird is very closely connected to Merlin, and both are used as tools for tracking bird populations. But eBird provides translations to, I think it's something like 70 different languages of bird names.
Oh,
So if
interesting.
you go and you look up a species on eBird, you can see what it's called in tens of different languages.
Very interesting. That's probably all part of it, right? This movement towards diversity in birding. Why is it important, from your perspective, to have more people into birding?
Yeah, I mean, birding ranges such a wide range of things, right? Kevin Lewis was saying earlier, you know, that his people, that he is a birder. They're watching the birds coming and going, and you know, we like birding for many other people is watching the birds that come to their feeder. Sometimes it is traveling to go see them. Sometimes it is keeping a list of where you've seen different species. The point is that there's no wrong way to watch birds, right? If you enjoy them and appreciate them, as long as you're respecting birds and you're respecting people, you're not doing it wrong. When you find an appreciation for something, though, you put a value on it. And when you value something, you want to protect it. And our natural world needs that protection. And it needs more people who care about it and love it and have a value put on it. So the more folks that we can get engaged to some extent with the natural world, put some value on it, the better for the conservation of our world.
Mm-hmm. Which is increasingly important as we deal with climate change.
Yeah, the problems are getting bigger.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. This has been a wonderful show, Gabriel. This is kind of a big question, but just thinking about people listening, and they might want some practical ideas. Where do we go from here? If you've sparked something in others today, but for people who are listening to Blue Sky and they're like, I want to contribute. I want to know. I want to be part of this movement. What do people do? Where do we go from here?
This is really exciting, actually, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't come up earlier, but we were just too busy exploring the issue. But so the issue that we were pushing for, which was changing all of these honorific names, the American Ornithological Society decided last fall that they would change them all. So they are all going to be changed in North America to have descriptive names. Very exciting news. And of course, this provides the opportunity to come up with bird names for these birds. Now, the really cool thing is that it's not going to be the same process that has been used in the past, where we had a dozen taxonomists deciding on the names. They're going to create a new committee that is formed of people who are more kind of language focused rather than just focused on taxonomy. And it's going to involve public input. So if you are interested in thinking about new names, ways to describe birds, there's a real opportunity for you here, because there's about 150 birds that will be renamed in the next number of years.
So should they connect bird names for birds? That's your group. Is there another website that people should know about? Just quickly before we wrap things up today.
The American Ornithological Society, AmericanOrnithology.com.
Go right there.
They're the ones who are leading on
okay.
all of
Gabriel, thank you for this. It's been wonderful talking to you.